The first time I kissed Ethan, my heart felt like it might explode. We were hidden in the shadows of a Chicago alley, the city's pulse drowning out my fear, and his breath was warm against my lips. I was 28, a man living a lie, and that kiss was the first truth I'd dare to claim. My name is Daniel Carter, and I'd spent years perfecting the art of hiding. Growing up in a small Illinois town, I learned early that being gay wasn't something you shouted from the rooftops, not if you wanted to survive the whispers and the judgment. My family was the kind that went to church every Sunday, where my father, a stern man with a Bible always at hand, preached that love was a straight line between a man and a woman. So I played the part, dated girls, joined the football team, and buried my truth so deep it felt like a bruise I could never touch. By the time I moved to Chicago for work, I thought I'd escaped. I was a graphic designer, living in a sleek apartment with a view of Lake Michigan, engaged to Sarah, a kind-hearted woman who deserved better than my half-truths. She was the daughter of Richard Hayes, a retired Marine with a handshake like a vice and eyes that could pin you to the wall. Richard was the kind of man who filled a room, his voice booming with stories of duty and honor. I admired him, feared him, and did everything to stay in his good graces. But Ethan changed everything. I met Ethan at a coffee shop in Boys Town, Chicago's vibrant gay neighborhood. He was a barista with messy brown hair and a smile that could unravel me. We started talking one rainy afternoon when I lingered too long over my latte, and soon, those talks turned into late-night texts, stolen glances, and moments that made my carefully constructed life feel like a house of cards. Ethan was out, unapologetically himself, and being near him felt like standing in sunlight after years in the dark. One night, after months of sneaking around, I slipped. Richard, who'd come to the city to visit Sarah, saw me leaving Ethan's apartment. I didn't know it then, but his truck was parked across the street, and his eyes caught the way Ethan's hand brushed mine as we said goodbye. The next day, at a family dinner, Richard's gaze was heavier than usual. He didn't say anything, but I felt it, a storm brewing behind his silence. Sarah was oblivious, chattering about wedding plans, her blonde curls bouncing as she described the venue. I nodded, smiled, and pretended my world wasn't teetering. But Richard's stare burned through me, and when he asked me to step outside after dessert, my stomach dropped. "We need to talk, Daniel," he said, his voice low, like the rumble before thunder. Outside, under the glow of a street lamp, Richard didn't waste words. "I saw you last night. With that guy." His tone was flat, but his eyes were sharp, cutting through my defenses. I froze, my mouth dry, every excuse I'd rehearsed vanishing. "You're engaged to my daughter," he continued, stepping closer. "You think you can play her like that? Lie to her face." I wanted to run, to disappear, but my feet were rooted. "It's not what you think," I stammered, but it was exactly what he thought. For the first time, I saw Richard not as Sarah's father, but as a man who could break me with a word. He didn't shout, didn't raise a fist. Instead, he said something that chilled me. "You're going to fix this, Daniel, or I will." The next week was a blur of dread. I avoided Ethan, ignored his texts, and threw myself into wedding plans to appease Richard. But every night, I lay awake, torn between the life I'd built and the one I wanted. Sarah deserved the truth, but telling her meant risking everything. My family, my job, the respect of a man I'd come to see as a father. And Ethan, he was a dream I wasn't sure I was brave enough to chase. One evening, Ethan showed up at my apartment, his face pale but determined. "You can't just shut me out, Dan," he said, his voice breaking. "I know you're scared, but this us, it's real." I wanted to pull him close, to tell him he was right, but Richard's words echoed in my head. "Fix this or I will." I sent Ethan away, my heart splintering as he left. Days later, Richard called me to his house in the suburbs. I drove there, my hands shaking on the wheel, expecting a confrontation. But when I arrived, he was sitting on his porch, a beer in hand, looking not angry but tired. "Sit," he said, pointing to a chair. I obeyed, bracing for the worst. "Daniel," he began, staring at the horizon. I've seen a lot in my life. War, death, men at their best and worst. I thought I knew what was right, what was wrong. But I'm starting to wonder if I've been wrong about a lot. His words caught me off guard. Was this the same man who'd threatened to fix me? He turned to me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. I don't understand your world, son, but I know my daughter loves you, and I know you're not happy. My breath hitched. Was he giving me an out, or setting a trap? Before I could respond, he stood, his shadow looming. You've got a choice to make, but whatever you do, don't break her heart, and don't lie to yourself. He walked inside, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. I drove back to the city, my mind a storm. Richard hadn't exposed me, hadn't destroyed me, but his words were a challenge, a push to face the truth I'd been running from. I loved Ethan. I didn't love Sarah, not the way she deserved. But could I unravel the life I'd built without losing everything? That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at a photo of Sarah and me, her smile radiant, mine forced. I knew what I had to do, but the fear was a living thing clawing at my chest. The truth was a door I'd kept locked for years, and opening it meant stepping into a world I wasn't sure I could survive. The next morning, I called Sarah. My voice trembled as I asked her to meet me at our favorite diner, a quiet place with checkered floors and coffee that tasted like home. I needed to tell her the truth, but the words felt like knives in my throat. When she arrived, her blue eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had drawn me to her years ago. She slid into the booth, her engagement ring glinting under the fluorescent lights. "You okay, Dan?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "You look like you haven't slept." I hadn't. The weight of Richard's words, Ethan's plea, and my own cowardice had kept me up all night. "Sarah," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." Her smile faltered, and I hated myself for what was coming. "I'm gay," I said, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. "I've known for years, but I didn't know how to tell you." The diner seemed to freeze. The clink of dishes, the hum of conversation, all faded. Sarah's face went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She didn't cry, not at first. She just stared, as if trying to rewrite the words I'd spoken. "Is this about that guy?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Ethan. I love him, Sarah. I'm so sorry." The silence that followed was suffocating. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but raw. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let me think we had a future?" Each word was a blow, and I had no defense. I'd lied to her, to myself, for too long. I was scared, I admitted. I thought I could make it work. I thought I could be what everyone wanted. She shook her head, tears spilling now. "You should have trusted me, Dan. I loved you." The past tense in her words cut deeper than I'd expected. She left the diner without another word, and I sat there, the weight of my confession settling like dust. I'd done the right thing, but it felt like tearing my life apart. When I finally stepped outside, the Chicago wind was biting, a reminder that the world kept moving, even when mine was crumbling. I expected Richard to call, to demand answers, but he didn't. Instead, Ethan did. "Sarah called me," he said when I picked up, his voice cautious. "She told me what happened. Are you okay?" I wasn't, but hearing his voice was a lifeline. We met that evening in the park where we'd shared our first real date, under a cherry tree just starting to bloom. "I hurt her," I said, sitting on a bench, my hands clenched. "I hurt her, and I don't know how to fix it." Ethan sat beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You can't fix it, Dan, but you can start being honest, with her, with yourself." His hand found mine, and for the first time I didn't pull away. Days turned into weeks, and I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with Sarah. She didn't speak to me, and I didn't blame her. I threw myself into work, into Ethan, trying to build something real from the wreckage. But Richard's silence loomed like a shadow. I knew he was watching, waiting, and I braced for his judgment. One afternoon, I found an envelope slipped under my new apartment door. Inside was a handwritten note from Richard. "Meet me at the lakefront tomorrow." Noon. We need to finish this. My stomach twisted. Was this the confrontation I'd been dreading? Or something else? The next day, I arrived at Lake Michigan's edge, the water glittering under a rare sunny sky. Richard was there, standing by a bench, his marine posture unmistakable. He didn't smile, but he didn't scowl either. "Walk with me," he said, and I fell in a step beside him, the gravel crunching under our feet. "I've been thinking about what you told Sarah," he said after a long silence. Took me a while to wrap my head around it. I grew up in a different time, Daniel. Men like me, we were taught certain things. But I've been reading, talking to people. I even went to one of those support groups in the city. I stopped walking stunned. Richard, the man who'd once called anything different a sin, had gone to a support group? "I don't get it all," he continued, staring at the water. "But I see how you look at that boy, Ethan. It's the same way I looked at my wife when we were young. I can't argue with that." His voice was gruff, but there was a crack in it, a hint of something softer. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Richard I'd feared. "I'm sorry for lying," I managed. "I never wanted to hurt Sarah." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I know. She's hurting, but she's strong. She'll be okay. The question is, what are you going to do now?" His question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like the truth wasn't a chain but a key. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Richard's acceptance, tentative as it was, didn't erase the challenges ahead. My family, my career, the world that still judged people like me. As we walked back to the parking lot, Richard clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You're still family, Daniel. Don't forget that." His words were a lifeline, but they also carried a weight. Family meant expectations, and I wasn't sure what it meant for me. Ethan and I started building a life together, tentative at first, like learning to walk on new ground. We moved into a small apartment in Andersonville, a neighborhood where rainbow flags hung proudly on porches. It felt like a sanctuary, but the outside world wasn't always so kind. At work, rumors started to spread. A coworker had seen me with Ethan at a bar, and soon, whispers followed me in the office. My boss, a man with a knack for traditional values, started giving me less high-profile projects. "Just keeping things balanced," he'd say, but I knew better. I was being sidelined, my career teetering because I dared to live openly. Ethan was my anchor through it. He'd hold me when I came home frustrated, his arms a quiet promise that we'd get through this. But the pressure wasn't just external. My parents, still in that small Illinois town, hadn't spoken to me since I'd come out to them over the phone. My mother cried. My father hung up. Their silence was louder than any words. Richard, though, kept surprising me. He called one evening, his voice gruff but warm. "You and Ethan free this weekend? I'm grilling at the house." I nearly dropped the phone. Was he serious? When we arrived at his suburban home, the smell of charcoal and burgers greeted us. Richard shook Ethan's hand, firm but not hostile, and I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. Dinner was awkward at first. Ethan, usually so confident, was quiet, hyper-aware of Richard's presence. But Richard broke the ice, asking Ethan about his job at a nonprofit for LGBTQ youth. "Sounds like good work," Richard said, and I caught Ethan's surprised smile. Sarah wasn't there. She was still keeping her distance. But Richard's effort felt like a bridge, fragile but real. That night, as we drove back to the city, Ethan squeezed my hand. "He's trying, Dan. That's more than most." I nodded, but a part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Richard's acceptance felt too good to be true, like a calm before a storm I couldn't see. The storm came weeks later. I got a call from my mother, her voice trembling. "Your father's sick, Daniel. Cancer. He wants to see you." My world tilted. My father, the man who'd taught me to hide, was dying, and I hadn't spoken to him in months. I told Ethan I had to go, and he insisted on coming with me. The drive to my hometown was heavy with memories. The fields stretched endless under a gray sky, and every mile brought me closer to a past I'd tried to leave behind. When we arrived at my parents' house, my mother hugged me, tears in her eyes, but my father was different. He lay in bed, frail but still sharp-eyed, his Bible on the nightstand. "Daniel," he said, his voice weak but firm, "you've made choices I don't understand. But you're my son." I waited for the lecture, the condemnation, but it didn't come. Instead, he reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I want you to be happy. That's all I ever wanted." Tears burned my eyes. I introduced Ethan, bracing for rejection, but my father just nodded. "Take care of him," he said to Ethan, and I felt the world shift again. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start, a crack in the wall he'd built. When we left, Ethan held me as I cried, the weight of years pouring out. I'd spent so long fearing my father's judgment, and now, facing his mortality, I saw a man trying to make peace. But the visit left me raw, questioning whether I could ever fully reconcile the boy I'd been with the man I was becoming. Back in Chicago, Richard invited us to a community event, a fundraiser for a local LGBTQ center. I was stunned when he told me he'd been volunteering there, learning about the community he'd once dismissed. I was wrong. He admitted one night over beers. I thought I knew what family meant, but it's bigger than I thought. His words stayed with me, a reminder that change was possible, even in the most unexpected places. But the world wasn't done testing us. A week later, I got an email from my boss. My contract was being reviewed. The subtext was clear. My openness was a liability. I showed Ethan, expecting him to be angry, but he just kissed my forehead. "We'll figure it out, Dan. Together." That night, I lay awake, Ethan's steady breathing beside me. I'd lost so much, Sarah, my parents' trust, maybe my job, but I'd gained something too, a life where I could love without fear. Richard's acceptance, my father's fragile olive branch, Ethan's unwavering support. They were threads weaving a new future, one I was still learning to trust. The job situation worsened. My boss called me into his office, his face a mask of false concern. "We're restructuring, Daniel. Your position might not be viable." I knew it was a lie, a polite way to push me out. I left the meeting with my fists clenched, the city skyline mocking me with its indifference. Ethan was waiting outside, his bike leaning against a lamppost. "How'd it go?" he asked, but my face told him everything. He pulled me into a hug, right there on the sidewalk, and for once, I didn't care who saw. "You're more than that job," he said fiercely. "You're enough." I wanted to believe him, but the rejection stung. I'd worked hard to build a career, and now was slipping away because of who I loved. That night, I called Richard, needing someone to ground me. To my surprise, he didn't offer platitudes. "Come to the house tomorrow," he said. "About an idea." When Ethan and I arrived, Richard was in his garage, surrounded by boxes of old marine gear. He handed me a business card for a friend who ran a design firm. "He's looking for talent. I told him about you. No promises, but it's a start." I stared at the card, stunned. Richard, the man who'd once terrified me, was helping me rebuild. The interview with Richard's friend went better than I'd hoped. The firm was small but progressive, and they liked my portfolio. A week later, I had a job offer, lower pay, but a chance to start fresh. I accepted, feeling a spark of hope I hadn't in months. Meanwhile, Sarah reached out. She wanted to meet, just the two of us. My stomach churned as I agreed, unsure what to expect. We met at a quiet cafe, and she looked different, stronger, somehow, despite the pain in her eyes. "I'm not angry anymore," she said, stirring her coffee. "I just needed time. I want you to be happy, Dan. Really." Her words were a gift I didn't deserve. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about her plans, her new job, her dreams. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was peace. When we parted, she hugged me, and I felt a weight lift. Life with Ethan settled into a rhythm. We cooked dinners together, bickered over whose turn it was to do dishes, and stole kisses in the morning light. But the world outside our apartment wasn't always kind. One night, walking home from a movie, a group of guys shouted slurs at us, their voices sharp with hate. Ethan squeezed my hand, his jaw tight, and we kept walking, but the words lingered. I told Richard about it the next time we met. He listened, his face darkening. "That's not right," he said, his voice low. "You shouldn't have to deal with that." Then he did something that floored me. He invited us to a rally at the LGBTQ center where he was speaking. Richard, a retired Marine, standing up for people like me? I couldn't wrap my head around it. The rally was packed, the air electric with hope and defiance. When Richard took the stage, he spoke about his daughter, about me, about learning to see the world differently. "I was wrong for a long time," he said, his voice steady. "But love is love, and family is family. I'm here to stand with you." The crowd erupted, and I felt Ethan's hand in mine, tears blurring my vision. Afterward, Richard found us in the crowd. "I meant what I said," he told me. "You're family, Daniel. Both of you." Ethan hugged him, and for the first time, I saw Richard smile, really smile at us. But life wasn't a fairy tale. My father's health was declining, and I visited him whenever I could. Each trip was a mix of hope and pain, his words growing softer, his time shorter. One evening, he asked to see a photo of Ethan and me. I showed him one from the park, our smiles bright under the cherry tree. "You look happy," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's enough." When we left, my mother hugged Ethan, a small gesture that meant the world. I was starting to believe that family could mean more than I'd ever thought possible. But the fear still lingered. Fear of losing what I'd gained. Fear of a world that could still turn cruel. My father passed away a month later. The funeral was small, held in the church where I'd grown up hiding. Ethan sat beside me, his presence a quiet strength as I said goodbye to the man who'd shaped so much of my fear and, in the end, my hope. My mother held my hand, her grief mingling with a new warmth toward me and Ethan. Back in Chicago, life moved forward, but the weight of loss lingered. My new job was challenging but fulfilling, and Ethan's work at the nonprofit was gaining traction. We were building something real, something ours, but the world still tested us. Hate wasn't loud every day, but it was there, in a coworker's sideways glance, in a stranger's muttered slur. Richard became our unexpected ally. He started a support group for parents of LGBTQ kids, using his Marine grit to challenge old prejudices. At one meeting, he invited me to speak. I stood before a room of strangers, my voice shaking as I share my story, hiding, coming out, finding love. When I finished, a woman in the back, tears in her eyes, thanked me for helping her understand her son. I realized then that my truth wasn't just mine, it was a light for others. Sarah and I stayed in touch, our friendship fragile but growing. She started dating again, and when she introduced me to her new boyfriend, I saw her smile in a way I never could have given her. "I'm happy for you, Dan," she said, and I knew she meant it. One spring evening, Ethan and I returned to the park where it all began. The cherry tree was in full bloom, petals drifting like soft promises. He took my hand, his eyes bright. "Marry me, Dan," he said, pulling a ring from his pocket. My heart stopped, then soared. "Yes," I whispered, and we kissed as petals fell around us, the world fading away. We told Richard first. I braced for hesitation, but he just grinned, pulling us both into a bear hug. "About time," he said, then insisted on hosting the engagement party. The backyard was strung with lights, filled with friends, Sarah, even my mother. Richard raised a glass, his voice booming. "To Daniel and Ethan, two men who taught an old Marine what love really means." The wedding was small, on a Lake Michigan beach at sunset. Ethan looked radiant, his vows a promise to stand by me through every storm. I vowed to be brave, to live openly, to love him without fear. As we danced under the stars, Richard clapped my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, and I felt the weight of years lift. Today, Ethan and I are married, building a life in a world that's changing slowly but surely. Richard's still out there, challenging his old Marine buddies to see people like me as people, not labels. My mother visits, bringing her famous apple pie, and Sarah's become a friend who knows me better than most. I used to think coming out would end my world. Instead, it gave me one worth living in. Richard's acceptance, my father's final words, Ethan's love, they're proof that even in a world that can be cruel, there's room for change, for hope, for love that defies the odds. And that still shocks me today.